Hey, this is Bunny. Today we're talking about something that doesn't get nearly enough credit in fantasy storytelling, tabletop gaming, or even miniature painting discussions: humor. Specifically, the role of humor in epic stories. Now, I know what some people are thinking. Epic stories are serious business. We have dark lords, ancient prophecies, kingdoms collapsing, dragons setting entire tax districts on fire, and heroes carrying the emotional weight of 17 generations of bad decisions. Surely this is not the place for jokes. Surely this is the place for dramatic speeches delivered on windswept cliffs while orchestral music swells in the background. And yes, that absolutely has its place. But if you've ever sat through 4 straight hours of unrelenting doom and gloom, you know that eventually, even the apocalypse starts getting a little repetitive. As I'm painting today's miniature, which is, by the way, a very poor quality miniature from an older board game that I just wanted to paint up so we have a little more fun when we are playing the game, so it's not a good quality miniature, the paint job won't be good. But while I'm painting this guy, I really started thinking about how many of my favorite fantasy stories use humor, and how often the funny moments are actually what make the serious moments work. It's a little like miniature painting. If every surface is highlighted to maximum brightness, nothing stands out anymore. If every section is dark and shadowy, the whole figure starts looking muddy. You need contrast. Your brightest highlights matter because shadows exist. Your shadows matter because highlights exist. Storytelling works the same way. A joke isn't always there to interrupt tension. Sometimes it's there to create tension. Sometimes it's there to relieve tension. Sometimes it's there because somebody just got hit in the face by a goose, and honestly, that's funny regardless of the genre. One of the biggest misconceptions about epic fantasy is that it has to take itself seriously every second of every day. The truth is that most real people don't behave that way. Human beings are weird little creatures. We crack jokes at funerals, we laugh during stressful situations, we make terrible puns when we're nervous. If a dragon landed outside your house tomorrow and announced that it intended to consume your village, somebody somewhere would immediately ask whether the dragon was accepting reservations. It wouldn't be the smart response. It wouldn't be the logical response, but it would absolutely happen. Humor is part of how people process fear, uncertainty, and chaos. If your characters never joke, they often start feeling less realistic, not more realistic. Tabletop role-playing games demonstrate this beautifully. Every dungeon master starts with grand ambitions. The campaign begins with ancient ruins, forgotten prophecies, mysterious villages, and carefully crafted lore. Then 15 minutes into session 1, the party adopts a random goat. That goat acquires a name. The goat somehow becomes essential to the plot. 3 months later, the heroes have forgotten the name of the king, but would willingly march into the 9 hells to rescue Gerald the emotional support goat. This happens constantly. It happens because players naturally create humor, even when they don't mean to. Especially when they don't mean to. I've seen campaigns where entire wars were overshadowed by a wizard's inability to successfully cast simple spells. I've seen legendary heroes become famous for accidentally falling out of windows. I've seen parties spend more time discussing tavern menus than investigating murders. Yet somehow those campaigns still produce powerful emotional moments. Sometimes they produce stronger emotional moments because the players spent so much time laughing together. The comedy builds attachment. The attachment creates investment. Then when something serious happens, everybody suddenly cares. It's difficult to mourn a character nobody likes. It's much easier to mourn a lovable idiot who accidentally started 3 separate international incidents and somehow survived all of them. The same principle appears throughout fantasy literature. Think about how often beloved fantasy characters have moments of humor mixed into their otherwise serious narratives. They tease each other. They argue about ridiculous things. They make observations that are completely inappropriate for the situation. Imagine an epic quest where every character speaks exclusively in dramatic declarations. Nobody says, well, this is bad. Nobody says, I told you not to touch the cursed artifact. Nobody says, in my defense, I thought the giant glowing skull was decorative. After a while, the dialogue starts feeling less like people and more like a convention of professional speech givers. One of my favorite forms of fantasy humor is what I call competence humor. This is when characters are very good at something, but the thing they're good at is hilariously specific. Maybe the ranger can track a goblin across 3 mountain ranges but cannot remember where he left his boots. Maybe the wizard understands 17 ancient languages but keeps forgetting basic social customs. Maybe the paladin can defeat demons, yet becomes completely helpless when faced with a locked pickle jar. These little contradictions make characters memorable. They also make them feel human, well, humanish, depending on how many horns, scales, wings, or mysterious glowing eyes they've accumulated throughout their travels. Miniatures often tell similar stories visually. Sometimes you'll paint a towering barbarian covered in scars, wielding an axe the size of a canoe, and then notice that the sculpt gave him an expression that looks mildly confused. Suddenly, your imagination starts filling in the blanks. Maybe he's terrifying in battle, but constantly loses track of simple instructions. Maybe he's a legendary warrior who cannot remember anybody's birthday. Maybe he's been sent on a sacred quest and has absolutely no idea where he's supposed to be going. A single funny detail can transform a generic figure into a character that sticks in your memory. Humor also serves an important pacing function. Epic stories are long, really long. Some fantasy series contain enough pages to physically stun an intruder if thrown with sufficient force. Readers and viewers need occasional breaks. Constant tension becomes exhausting. Constant seriousness becomes numbing. Humor gives the audience a chance to breathe. It lets them relax before the next major conflict arrives. It's the storytelling equivalent of putting down your paintbrush, stretching your back, and reminding yourself that yes, you do in fact need food and water to survive. You can't stay at maximum intensity forever. Neither can a story. There's also something wonderfully democratic about humor. Not every viewer will appreciate the same battle scene. Not every reader will love the same political intrigue. Not every player will care about kingdom management mechanics. But nearly everybody enjoys laughing. The specific jokes will vary. Some people love witty dialogue, others absurd situations, some appreciate physical comedy, and some apparently find it hilarious when dice repeatedly betray their owners, which explains the popularity of tabletop gaming as a hobby. Humor creates common ground. It gives audiences another way to connect with a story beyond plot and spectacle. And honestly, miniature painting itself is filled with opportunities for accidental comedy. Every painter's experienced that moment when a project goes completely off the rails. You start with a vision of a noble knight. Somewhere around the third layer of highlights, he begins resembling an exhausted turnip farmer. You try to fix it. The situation deteriorates. 2 hours later, you're staring at what appears to be a medieval potato holding a sword. At that point, you have 2 choices. You can cry, or you can laugh. Most experienced painters choose laughter because we've all been there. Sometimes the paint wins. Sometimes the miniature wins. Sometimes the goblin you're painting develops eyebrows powerful enough to become a regional threat. Sometimes someone doesn't have a face because the face has no detail and you just, screw it, you're not doing it. And that's exactly why humor matters. It reminds us that stories, games, and creative hobbies are supposed to be enjoyable. Epic adventures are wonderful. Dramatic narratives are wonderful. World-ending stakes can be fantastic. But if nobody ever laughs, something important is missing. The best epic stories understand that courage and comedy are not opposites. In fact, they often travel together. Another thing that humor does exceptionally well is establish relationships. If you want an audience to believe that characters genuinely care about each other, one of the easiest ways to show that is through the way they joke together. Friends tease each other, siblings annoy each other. Longtime adventuring companions develop running jokes that make absolutely no sense to anyone outside the group. Somewhere in the campaign, there is a reference that causes the entire table to collapse into laughter, while a newcomer sits there wondering whether everyone has collectively lost their minds. The answer is usually yes, but it's a very specific kind of insanity. Shared humor creates history. It suggests experiences that happened before the current scene, and reminds us that these characters exist even when the plot isn't actively demanding their attention. This is especially important in tabletop gaming because players spend so much time simply existing together. A novel can skip 3 months with a sentence. A movie can use a montage. A role-playing group, however, may spend 45 minutes discussing whether they should buy a wagon. Not because they need a wagon, not because the wagon's important, but because someone has become convinced that the wagon represents a critical strategic investment while someone else believes the horse is secretly evil. During those conversations, jokes emerge naturally. The characters stop feeling like collections of statistics and start feeling like people. Weird people, frequently concerning people, but people nonetheless. Humor can also make villains more memorable. We often think of great villains as terrifying, and many are. But a villain who occasionally displays wit can become far more engaging than one who only delivers threats. Imagine a dark lord who enters every room like he's auditioning for the position of most dramatic person alive. Black cloak billowing, thunder somehow occurring indoors, monologue prepared in advance. That can be entertaining for a while. But imagine the same villain occasionally making a dry observation about the hero's incompetence. Suddenly, there's another layer to the character. The audience begins enjoying scenes with the villain rather than simply waiting for the villain to lose. Of course, there's a balance to all of this. Humor works best when it serves the story rather than overwhelming it. We've all encountered situations where every serious moment gets interrupted by a joke. A kingdom falls, joke. Ancient evil awakens, joke. Hero discovers heartbreaking family secret, joke. Eventually, the audience stops taking anything seriously because the story itself refuses to take anything seriously. It's a little like miniature painting when every surface receives the same special effect. If every sword glows, glowing swords stop feeling special. If every moment becomes comedic, comedy loses its impact. Humor is strongest when it appears at the right time rather than all the time. One of my favorite examples of this balance comes from role-playing games. Sometimes a group will spend an entire session laughing at ridiculous situations. The bard accidentally insults a duke. The rogue falls into a fountain. The barbarian becomes emotionally invested in a bakery. Everyone is having a great time. Then suddenly the campaign introduces a genuinely serious moment. Maybe an ally is lost. Maybe a village is destroyed. A long-running mystery finally reveals something terrible. The contrast hits harder because the table was laughing 5 minutes earlier. That emotional shift feels real because that's how life often works. Happiness and sadness rarely arrive in neat, separate boxes. When I'm painting miniatures, I often find myself inventing stories for the figures on my desk. I suspect many painters do this. It's hard not to. You're spending hours staring at a tiny person. Eventually, your brain starts assigning personality traits. The armored knight becomes the responsible one. The rogue becomes the problem. The wizard becomes the bigger problem, who somehow convinces everyone else that his problems are actually solutions. Before long, you've accidentally created an entire adventuring party complete with interpersonal dynamics and unresolved arguments. Humor often appears first, because humor is one of the fastest ways to define a character. Consider the classic fantasy party. You have the fighter, the rogue, the wizard, and the cleric. On paper, those are the roles, functions, mechanical descriptions. Yet the moment you add humor, they become individuals. The fighter complains about stairs, the rogue steals sandwiches, the wizard explains simple concepts with the confidence of someone who has never successfully explained anything. The cleric develops chronic headaches from dealing with everyone else. Suddenly, they aren't character sheets anymore, they're people. Questionable people. People who absolutely should not be trusted with explosive magical artifacts. But people all the same. There's also an interesting connection between humor and scale. Epic fantasy frequently deals with enormous concepts. Cosmic threats, gods, dragons, prophecies, magical catastrophes. These concepts are huge, sometimes too huge. Humor helps bring the audience back to a human level. The world may be ending, but somebody still has to carry supplies. Somebody still forgot the map. Somebody still walked directly into a tree while trying to look heroic. Small moments help us connect with larger stories. They provide perspective. The same thing happens with miniature painting. You might be working on an incredible dragon model with hundreds of scales and elaborate details. It represents an apex predator capable of devastating kingdoms. Then halfway through the painting process, you accidentally give it an expression that makes it look mildly disappointed. Now, instead of an unstoppable force of destruction, it looks like it's judging your life choices. That's funny. More importantly, it's memorable. The dragon acquires personality. Sometimes our mistakes accidentally improve the final result. Not always. Sometimes the dragon still looks terrible and we have to roll with it. But occasionally, disaster becomes inspiration. I think that's one reason humor survives in fantasy regardless of trends. Different styles come and go. Some eras prefer darker stories, some prefer lighter adventures. Certain themes become popular while others fade. Yet humor remains because humor reflects something fundamental about people. We laugh, We tell stories. We share ridiculous experiences. We turn disasters into anecdotes. Every tabletop player has a story that begins with words. So there we were, and everything had already gone wrong. Those stories get retold for years because humor transforms moments into memories. The campaign may end, the characters may retire, but everyone remembers the incident involving the donkey, the chandelier, and the inexplicable decision-making process that followed. Perhaps the most important thing humor accomplishes is making audiences care. We naturally gravitate toward characters who make us smile. We enjoy spending time with them. We want to see them succeed. That's incredibly valuable in storytelling because emotional investment cannot be forced. Spectacle alone isn't enough. A giant battle may impress people, but memorable characters keep them engaged. Humor helps build that connection. It encourages affection. It creates familiarity. When audiences laugh with characters, they begin to feel like companions rather than observers. That relationship makes every future triumph and tragedy more meaningful. So the next time you're playing a tabletop campaign or painting a miniature, pay attention to the role humor plays. Notice how often it appears. Notice how frequently it supports rather than undermines serious storytelling. Notice how many beloved characters have at least a little bit of humor built into them. Epic stories aren't weakened by laughter. In many cases, they're strengthened by it. Humor gives us contrast, pacing, personality, and humanity. It reminds us that even in worlds filled with dragons, dark lords, ancient magic, and impossible quests, people are still people. They'll still tell jokes, they'll still make mistakes. They still do ridiculous things for reasons that make perfect sense at the time and absolutely no sense afterward. And honestly, if a group of adventurers can march into a volcano to save the world but can't successfully organize a dinner reservation, that feels pretty realistic to me. That's about it for today. Tell me the funniest thing that has ever happened in one of your tabletop campaigns, fantasy stories, or miniature painting projects. I hope you'll be back with us next time. Bye!